All right, welcome everyone to the ground-based noise meeting for Monday, July 19th. We are scheduled to go from 12 to 1:30. We already know that a couple of board members have to leave early. So with permission of everyone, I'm going to have, we're going to go straight into number one, review of ground-based noise report and direction to staff on next steps. And Michelle, your
Pardon me, Anne, I'm sorry. If we can take public comments on items not on the agenda before taking
okay.
item one.
Thank you. Sorry about that. All right. If there are people, do you want to give the overview of how to do it?
Yeah. Yes,
Go ahead.
thank you so much. So for those attending the meeting on the Zoom video conference, we will use the raise hand feature in order to organize any public comments. During the general public comment period, I will ask those members of the public who wish to comment to click the raise hand features to speak on that agenda item. For those joining by phone, please press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. When you hear your name called, I will prompt you to unmute your microphone and inform you that you may begin speaking. You will have 2 minutes. And right now we will be taking comments for items not on the agenda. And I do not see any hands being raised at the moment.
Okay. All right. Closing. Just give it another second. Closing comments for items not on the agenda. All right. Then moving into number one, review of ground-based noise report and direction to staff. Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, thank you very much. The last ground-based noise study meeting, which was on January 27th, we got an introduction and overview from HMMH, Justin Cook, on the report. He gave recommendations at that time, and he's given us updated recommendations. The conclusion of the meeting, however, was to reschedule the meeting in order to give people time to read it. To ask Justin to return with anything that's surprised him about the study and any recommendations on next steps, as well as any findings that he found on the study. And since that time, we have received one set of written comments from Hillsborough, and Commissioner Royce is here to describe that and to get any responses. And we could have up to you, Chair, how you want to go next, but we do have the written memo from Justin Cook giving recommendations on next step. Today, Bert Ganong and Justin and I met to review SFO's comments. They're still working on getting their written comments on them, but Bert also has comments. And of course, Al has his from Hillsborough. So I'll stop at that and let you decide how you want to handle next steps.
This meeting, and again, we have some new members here. Typically, the working groups allow more interplay, more discussion on that. So Mayor Royce, Al, if you would like to go first, and then we'll have Bert go. And let's hear, even though you put it in a letter, let's get it out on the recorded.
Thank you, Mayor. It's been a while since we met, and I know at the last meeting we had done some oral questions and inquiries. I think the request at the end of the meeting was if we could put them in a paper format and send them in so we could get a record so we could respond. So that's what I did here, and that's what's attached. I don't know how much we could spend the whole time going through these questions on this report, frankly, and I'm not sure that's our best use of time, but let me just highlight a few things. And again, my letter is attached to the packet. I was most concerned, I think, with the vegetation results and making sure I understood what that meant and how that could be interpreted. Again, our objective in this ground-based thing is to try to figure out how we can mitigate what's causing the ground-based noise and how we mitigate it. And that's what this study was supposed to do. And so we talked about noise mitigation principles on page 91. I'm not sure I fully understand what we're talking about there, Justin, from a practical perspective and how we accommodate that. We talk about vegetation, and I'm interested in the location of the vegetation, what impact that has. I assume the nearest the airport, the better, but I'd like some clarity on how significant vegetation be and where it should be placed. And I'm probably most concerned about the bouncing impact of structures that are built. either have been built or will be built, and what impact that would have, and how this study responds to that, because that would be something that we're going to have to deal with going forward. I also asked some questions just about other studies, anything surprising the authors in this study, anything that pops out. What is the SFO airport response to the report? What can they be doing to help mitigate that's practical and feasible? And so those are my questions. And I don't know if I want to go through all, 13 or 14 of them, but those are the basic ones.
And I would agree with all of those. I wonder if, Michelle, do we have the budget that HMMH could come back and kind of like question by question, give us an update at our next meeting on that?
Well, I'm afraid to answer it until we have all of the questions.
Okay,
But
because yeah, I didn't get mine in writing. I apologize. I guess being a new mayor, the year started off fairly overwhelming on that. So I have 15 or 16 questions of my own. Some of them reflect what Mayor Roy said too. So I agree. We don't have the time to do here to get into each one. But maybe in the interim until we meet again, if we can continue to get those questions, we can get those answers. Justin, did you get the mayor's main questions? And we can at least address those. But let me get Bert's on the table too. Okay, good. Thank you. Bert, if you could give us your impression on that. And we know that your comments, the official comments from SFO are coming through and they're currently in legal, which is not to make it scary, just having legal go through the questions or the response.
Anything that goes out pretty much, goes through legal, but that's done. It's with management now. So anyway, let's see. All right. So in my review of the report, I noticed that, and we knew this ahead of time going in, that sound plan was the model that was used for the study. I do feel that we really need to make a heavy emphasis that it's not an approved federal noise contouring software. The only one it is AEDT. And so whatever we generate in sound plan, and the reason we chose that was because it could deal with structures and buildings and things like that. But we do need to also put the caveat in there that whatever comes out of this contour wise still needs to be equated to a AEDT contour to have the FAA buy-in. And the reason you want that is so that you can have stuff eligible for federal funding, simply put. Next item that noticed was and I believe Justin did attract our attention to it, but the noise data from a Boeing 767 aircraft was used to represent the noise exposure of a Boeing 777 aircraft in sound plan. He did explain to me this morning the reason being was that they didn't have the exact, so they used close representative. And so just need to be explicit in that these aircraft do have very different sound profiles, and feel that the noise exposure in the study may not have been represented at the actual Boeing 777 noise levels. Next, the study used the values for temperature, humidity, barometric pressure that are standard in sound plan, and they're not actually representative of the actual conditions at SFO. So therefore the results may not be reflective of our actual noise exposure, and think that we ought to either note that or check that.
Bert, I'm sorry, did you say humidity and temperature?
Temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. figures 17, or 18 on pages 74, 75, we think that the same contour is used, and we're not sure which should be which should be in the report and which should be replaced, but I think that should be looked into as well. Because both the contours, in my belief, should be the same. Agree with Al Royce in that the study concludes that the vegetative barriers model have no discernible effects, reducing noise at residences nearest SFO. And thinking based on numerous studies that found low frequency noise is difficult to attenuate with buildings and structures. But in the report, it said that numerous times that it was not the best way to go with vegetation. It was really pretty ineffective, no discernible effects, I think was the term used, in reducing noise in residences nearest SFO. But in the conclusion, it seemed to lead people on, give unrealistic expectations that the vegetative barrier could be a mitigation. So thinking that probably ought to remove the trailing expectation. Thinking that would be the best bet, but perhaps rewording that might work out, and we discussed that this morning as well. Also too, close into the airport, you have to be careful with vegetative barriers because they do tend to interfere with the safe operating of aircraft. Can't be too tall. And then also too, can attract hazardous wildlife such as birds and things like that, which would not be good. And yeah, I think that would be a good place to stop.
Okay, I have my set of questions to our new member, Tom, Councilman Hamilton. Anything that you might like to bring up? I'm not putting you on the spot. I just want to make sure that you have an opportunity. And
Thank you. I
also
appreciate
Councilwoman
that. I
Taylor.
don't have anything to add at this point. I'm still soaking it all in. Thank you.
Okay, and again, if you want to meet more one-on-one and even walk our neighborhoods, I can help you come up to speed with what we've been talking about for the last couple of years on that, and happy to do that. Or if
Great.
you're coming to our Council of Cities dinner on Friday, you'll get a little bit of that.
Yeah, I will be there, and I was just about to say I'll connect with you then, and we can work that out.
Excellent, excellent.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so given timing, and we lose some members in about 30 minutes. In a really broad sense, I hear what Bert is saying, that we need to use something the FAA agrees with, the ADT contour model, but does the AEDT contour use C-weighted low frequency noise?
Yes, ma'am, you can use C-weighted within that model.
Okay, so if we can use C-weighted noise, why hasn't the FAA drawn any contours up into Burlingame or Millbrae or Hillsborough for that matter?
To date, the only accepted is A-weighted, which is the frequency range the human ear hears in.
Okay.
A-weighted does take into a little bit of C-weighted, but not much.
So it seems to me one of our first goals or direction to staff is we need to be working with the FAA for their models to include C-weighted noise. Am I off base there?
Well, I would say that their models do account or can account for C-weighted noise. I think what my recommendation would be to get, and this might go to the legislative subcommittee at this point too, is to get recommendations on policy regarding the use of C-weighted metrics for low frequency noise. So currently there's no policy related to the use, so they use A-weighted CNL is one of those A-weighted metrics. So that would be my recommendation. The modeling has the capability, and I do want to add that, you know, I do agree with Bert regarding the use of the model, but I think, and I just want to reiterate this, and I agree with Bert, but the model sound plan was chosen so that we could have a better understanding of hill effects, terrain, building structures, etc. And those things are only able to be done in sound plan currently. The FAA model does not have that capability. However, it does, like Bert said, has the capability to just do a C-weighted contour run. Just the contour would not take into account any building structures or mitigation. And Bert's nodding his head, so I know I'm on base here. So just want to make that clear. And my recommendation would be that to focus on some sort of policy recommendation or consideration for ground-based noise.
Thank you. And I apologize to the other members. Councilwoman Taylor, I didn't call on you specifically. I don't see your hand raised, but if you've got anything to add before, and then I jumped in and asked a question and he jumped in before Al's and Bert's.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I do have a question, and it may even be in the report, and that is just the areas. Do we have the tree canopy? Is that in the report, the tree canopy for each area or each city, or even the tree canopy for Millbrae?
So you mean existing conditions of trees?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's an excellent question.
It is an excellent question. It isn't in that the overall terrain is included, and the terrain is assigned what we consider a designated reflectivity. It's either called soft or hard terrain. So in areas where there's not buildings, it would be assigned a soft terrain, which has a certain characteristic on how things are being absorbed or reflected upon. And so areas with trees or foliage would have that soft designation. Areas like the freeway or any concrete would have a hard distinction. And that's just inherent upon the terrain and the data that we received through the county and various updates from the cities too that have participated. So hopefully
Michelle, we have one opportunity. The county has been conducting a heat island study. We've been waiting for it for quite a while. COVID, of course, has slowed it down, but that heat island study may map out existing foliage, and we're going to use that for part of our urban forest recovery program. So we could get data from an existing source as soon as the county releases that.
Ann,
Go ahead, Al.
question. I'm not 100% sure I understood what you said about the contour level on the A level. And I understand why we use sound plan, because it's critical that we understand the buildings and the structures that exist and what impact they have on ground-based noise. So I'm not sure when you say the FAA doesn't model that. I mean, what kind of results are they getting in their modeling or their reports if they're not including structures?
Yeah, it's basically terrain is included within AEDT. What's not included and it just has to go with the methodology and algorithms behind it and putting time and resources into programming it. It is on, I believe, their roadmap to include in AEDT, but currently there's no way for AEDT to calculate the effects of man-made structures. And it was part of I was part of the ACRP research study that went into calculating the effects of man-made structures, but it's just not currently part of the model. It's something on their future roadmap for inclusion.
But it is included in the the sound plan model.
Correct.
So it's
Correct.
doable. They just haven't done it yet, is what you're saying.
That's exactly, yes.
And why does that take?
So right now, it's what it is it really just takes, it's just a matter of incorporating it into the model. You know, the model is pretty intensive already. And when they talk about new features, they go through a whole entire process about, okay, if we're going to incorporate this feature, what do we expect this will do? And how do we even program that into the existing model? For example, like an SFO ADT run on a single computer could take, you know, weeks to run. It's that intensive. So what it would do is it would dramatically increase the amount of processing time, et cetera. They have to take time to code it, make sure all the coding's done. So it is possible there, and it is on their roadmap for something to and include in a future release of ADT. But right now it is not.
So let me get to my point, and Mayor, I don't want to monopolize it, but
That's okay, Al, you've got to leave us, so go ahead.
I'm good to 1:30, by the way. I've got my meeting moved back half an hour. So I'm worried about delays in all of this, because before the legislative committee, that's another month before we meet again, and then you got to go through a whole process. Would it not make more sense to have this committee draft a recommendation to the FAA, and legislative committee can probably sign off or approve that without a live meeting if need be? But I'm worried about this thing gets dragged out another 6 months. And so if they need something from us, then why don't we just start doing it now and just forward it on to whoever we forward it to?
Mhm.
Well, you know, and just to add that Al and I and Pamela DiGiovanni, I believe, are the legislative committee. I think you've already got 2 votes right there for that. And I'm sure Councilwoman DiGiovanni would go right along with us on that. So I think that's a great recommendation of something we can do between meetings.
Justin, good with doing
I
that?
had a couple of overviews, and then
Yeah,
then we'll
sounds
let
good.
Justin kind of go through everything. When I read through things and it talked, you know, with the roundtable, we live under the law of thou shalt not shift noise. But we started hearing more from Burlingame and, in fact, Hillsborough people, but more Burlingame people a few years ago, which coincidentally was after the 2 runways shifted closer to Millbrae, or shifted closer to Burlingame, given our hills. And I don't know if the study currently looked at the noise modeling that might have happened from, I'm trying to find my points here, the 2 sources of noise. You know, so the beginning, when they start to go to maximum thrust to begin running down the runway, and later on when they take off and change the angle of the flight on that. So if we're working under a theory that maybe the study can prove or disprove, is after those runways were moved 450 feet and 250 feet closer, did that create noticeable noise shifting at that point? And I don't think we had that in the study, did we? Oh, hang on to that. That's one of my questions. And then my other one was, when we looked at the influence, this is section A 3.1.2, influence of temperature, kind of what Bert was bringing up, the inversion layers. I found that really interesting. We're commonly having inversion layers, and the noise then shifts downward. I was trying to visualize that, but I'll give you my example. I lived in Mountain View, still have a house in Mountain View for 20 years, but the inversion layers during a concert at Shoreline Amphitheater direct the noise to a particular neighborhood in Palo Alto, and that neighborhood organized, and now concerts at Shoreline have to end at 10 o'clock at night. So that inversion layer can do some really significant stuff. So, but the other thing it doesn't do is it doesn't talk about our topography, because it talks about flatlining, using the ground-based studies that have been in existence. I think Baltimore was used, and it was flat. So ours actually takes in topography, which is exciting, I think, but maybe something that needs to be built out a little bit more. And the only thing I would say about vegetation, speaking for Millbrae and to answer Councilwoman Taylor, we have very little vegetation close into the airport. And what little vegetation we have, PG&E cut it down after the worst of the fires. And then the widening of 101 over the decades has chipped away at a berm and the plants that were on top of the berm. So now there's a scraggly row, and that's it. That's the only thing we have in this area. We have a couple of street trees, and that is pretty much it. And we only looked at what, 20 feet of vegetation. We did not look at what we knew would have been better, which was what, 100 or 200 feet or 200 yards. So I caution saying vegetation doesn't work, period, when we only looked at one example of vegetation. So with that, I have other questions that are a little technical, but I'll get them in writing for that next phase. So Justin, do you want to try to answer Al's questions and Bert's questions and then mine?
Okay. Sure.
As quickly as we can, and then we'll go. We've already got one recommendation for staff. We've got write a policy letter to our Congress folks about what we need to see. So we've got one direction on staff.
Okay.
And that would be a recommendation to the membership, the full membership.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And that would be, Al, just to make sure that I've captured it, this is a policy recommendation to the full roundtable that would go to Congress, including Congresswoman Spear, and possibly maybe also Congresswoman Eshoo. Yeah. Okay, so we can always do that, but that's what that recommendation is.
Could I add one more thing to that? And I would not only send it to them, I'd also have a recommendation, specific recommendation to the FAA that they change their policy methods on their own to incorporate the structures that are built.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Justin.
Okay, I will try to do my best here. We'll start with Bert's questions. So I think we talked a little bit about the model. So I think you hopefully understand the differences there. In terms of the aircraft noise profiles, I know Bert and I talked about this, as he said. Really what it came down to is that Sound Plan doesn't have any built-in aircraft noise profiles. So what had to be done was that we had to use HMMH's database in what we had available from actual measurements or from data that we've received over the years. And so what we did was we obviously had a good chunk, but the 767 and 777, what we had to do was find an aircraft that was as close to it as possible, but it is noted and probably worth noting a little bit further in the report that those characteristics can be different. And we did the best that we could given the data we had available. Overall, I think it's still the report went through a process that I still think the conclusions wouldn't necessarily change. I think it's just a matter of maybe clarifying a little bit more on, on the use of the data that we were able to utilize. In terms of weather data and pressure, it's an IOU. I'm going to go back and determine how we actually determine that. I think it was default settings in the model, and we might have looked probably at ADT default temperature settings, but I will go back and take a look at that. I will note that if in the case of looking at vegetation with and without vegetation, if you change the weather conditions for one and you change it for the other, really what we're looking at is the delta difference. So the overall conclusions of the report should not change. I think it's just one of those things we want to probably not only document, but understand, so that if there's future modeling done, we could, you know, make a change if that's something that you guys want to proceed with. Noted on his page graphics on the contours, we'll take a closer look at that. Could just be a figure error. There were a lot of figures in the report, so you know, the chances of missing one, you know, happens. But we'll take a look and get that fixed if needed. Conclusions on vegetation, and I think this also kind of gets back to Al's questions regarding vegetation and its effects. I'll try to clarify here, and I do think we could probably firm up and clean up some of the language regarding it. But you know, its overall effectiveness was shown in the higher mid to higher frequencies, and not so much the low frequencies. We do show, you know, 0.3 to 1 dB of reduction depending on, you know, the general area of the vegetation and where it's located. And obviously, as Ann said, if you have 200 feet, if you have space like that, it could be more effective, of course. And you know, like I said, it would be in the mid-high to upper frequencies mainly, and low frequencies below 250 hertz, you probably wouldn't get any attenuation, just because low frequency just continues to travel. But I think it's worth noting that we're not saying that vegetation is not completely ineffective. It is effective in certain frequencies and with certain variables of the vegetation itself. And I think we could just clean up some of that language to make better sense. In terms of the location, I think this was Al's point too. What we're saying is we modeled vegetation in an area that was adjacent to the freeway. And we chose that location because we wanted to see the true effects of vegetation without any other things in the way, such as building structures and other items that would exist. Where vegetation, as you could see in our report, is going to be the most effective is if it's right next to the receiver and really close in to the vegetation. There's a you know, what we call a shadow zone where it's effective within this range. And it goes for a wall too. You know, a freeway wall has a certain fall off, and you usually see that it's in the, you know, could be 10 to 15 feet behind the wall where it's most effective. And then as you move out from the wall or the vegetation, it becomes less effective because the noise is going up and over that structure or that vegetation type. Breaking line of sight is very important, of course. So if you're going to have any effective mitigation, whether it's a wall or vegetation, the key would be to locate it as close to the receiver as possible, and it would need to break line of sight. It would need to be a certain thickness to even be close to being effective. With the caveat that low frequency noise below a certain hertz level is probably not going to get any attenuation. It's really those mid to upper frequencies. Let me see here. Anything surprising? I don't think. I talked to Tim Middleton, who kind of led this project for us. There wasn't anything necessarily surprising other than what I would say is just the overall effects of terrain. A lot of the studies, as Ann knows, that we've gone over in the past really were flat terrain and various things, and I don't think it represented you know, an area with, you know, pretty significant terrain differences, and especially in a model that could account for that, with buildings and structures and all these other variables that previously weren't even possible because the modeling technology and methodology wasn't there to support running something like that, which is why the FAA model is still not able to take that into account. Sound plan has just progressed. And so this was kind of a unique first visualization of something like that. So I think, if anything, it wasn't a surprise, but it was very interesting to see the terrain effects of how low frequency noise is propagating throughout the communities, and actually kind of going through and up, not up vertically, but up across the hill. So Anne, I think
Justin?
you have a question for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm wondering, and I'd love to hear from Al, if that is also an additional recommendation of which, because what you just said is the modeling didn't exist. Therefore, there was no way to know that airports that are in a place where there are hills, and I was trying to run through my head of airports I've flown in and out of, SeaTac might be another one that could fit that environment. The hills are on both sides of SeaTac.
Right.
Could you give us a list of airports in the US, or maybe even some of the really proactive ones around the world that have anywhere similar topography, and maybe we can reach out to them as a future action? But I think along with the letter, that the policy decision that Al is recommending, that we also recommend that the current models only work on flat land. So Atlanta, great. Baltimore, great. Maybe even Boston and the New York airports, fine, but we are different.
San Diego.
I think that's a great.
Words.
Yeah, San Diego does have one that goes up.
They're lucky they've got nighttime curfew, you know?
Yeah,
so.
yeah, they do. They are very lucky. I will add that I think that's a great idea. I think I would maybe perhaps, and maybe this is what it's getting at, is making a recommendation that the model include man-made structures and other things that could affect how noise is propagating, or the contours that are being driven. It is on their roadmap, but maybe it's helpful to make sure that they're aware that that is important, and that should be put ahead of maybe other updates that they think are more important. So I think that's a great recommendation.
Can I add one more comment to that? We're talking about the noise impact from infrastructures. And I think, and Ann has alluded to this in the past, I'm a little bit concerned, more than a little bit, about the impacts from all the buildings and infrastructures that are being put up. And if in fact that we clearly know it bounces off of it, are there ways we can control the bounce? Is there any methods or recommendations that can effectively redirect that bounce so it's not going over residential homes? Or is that just pie in the sky? But is there been any studies or any kind of work done around that?
I mean, the reflections occur, I would say, within usually a close range for the mid to high frequencies. The problem is the low frequencies, of course. They're reflecting off, and they're not being reduced by a reflection. Usually those other frequencies, when they are reflected, they're at a lower level. You would think that even that brings up some vegetation planning. Other than that, and using some sort of material that is good at absorbing and it's applied to an exterior. The difficulty there is that there's limited, from my research, limited products that could be used outside, right? You'll see in a restaurant or a lobby products that reduce reflection and reverberation because they could be they're in an inside environment. But there hasn't been a lot that have been able to, you know, withstand weather and other conditions that could be applied to the exterior. I think there's research going on, and there's probably some possibilities, but other than that, I don't think there's anything. It becomes very challenging to try to control low frequency reflection noise from those types of structures. Yeah.
Justin, I can't remember if it was you or Bert. Several years ago, Al, they came to some meeting, maybe it was a working group meeting, about different materials and their noise absorption, construction materials. And when we were going through the program, the process of approving the project that's currently being in construction, I tried to get more of those materials in there, but until it's mandated, the developers really pushed back on that. You know, we also have to deal with how they position the building in terms of trying to create more public spaces and how windy we are and how unpleasant that can be if you put the building in the wrong place or the plaza in the wrong place. But I think that that's something we should have on our future plan. I still have this dream that if we had the Teslas, if we had the billionaires out there who cared about noise the way they care about going to space, we would be solving some of these material management issues. If we created that challenge, I mean, I don't mean that, I mean that actually really seriously. If we created the challenge to come up with better materials for construction in noise adverse areas, everybody's happier.
I wanted to let you know that Bert has his hand up too. And you may want to go to the public at some point.
I've been popping back and forth. Go ahead, Bert, to
Thank
see
you.
if their hands are raised.
I don't know if you guys have seen the article recently, but there was they called it an aerogel, and it's a newer material that you're talking about actually putting within the engine nacelles of aircraft that has an extreme sound dampening, and it's exceptionally lightweight. So they're thinking grand things for aircraft on that. But conversely, I'm thinking, well, what if we sprayed or put that all around and see what it ate up in the way of noise? I think that'd be awesome.
That's something, Michelle, to add to our future agenda is looking into things like that. Justin, I know, are you still going through our questions? And we are.
I was headed to yours, and I'm almost done, I think.
And then we'll open it up to the public. And I raised two now from the public.
Okay, I think there's just two main points here that I'll add from your discussion. So we did look at both takeoff points, and in terms of, you know, the initial takeoff and then the secondary takeoff point that Bert was able to provide us per runway. And so that was the goal, was to see how the noise propagates differently in each of those areas. The thing we did not necessarily do is compare prior to the runway threshold change to currently. So the modeling took into account current conditions of the runway configuration. It didn't take into account the prior before the threshold.
And my guess that the mantra, not noise shift, does not count on departures, counts for in-flight noise, not ground-based noise. That would be my guess, but something else for us to add to our policy letter.
Can I make a quick comment before? I'm sorry, Justin, I think you're done. I'll wait till you're done.
No, Al, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go. Yeah.
I'm concerned about making sure we have specific recommendations to follow up to mitigate the noise. And I think the comment about the aerogel is a great one to have a recommendation around pursuing and doing some modeling around it. I also would like to pursue, I don't know if we studied rubberized asphalt, but you know, I could envision where the buildings, the structures could bounce that noise to the ground into trees or to rubberized asphalt and effectively stop it from bouncing. And I don't know how practical it is or where that stands, but you know, I know in Vegas, they redirect all the sunlight away from those glass buildings. So, you know, redirection is not a phony premise. I just don't know how it applies here and whether it could apply. But I'm more concerned about making some specific recommendations of next steps there. Where we have to be going on this.
I can say you don't want the rubberized asphalt on runways.
Just not on runways, huh?
But what
Do
about
not want it on runways.
taxiways?
It's a safety issue.
What about taxiways, Bert?
We actually go out and strip off the rubber, and we're getting ready to do one coming up here in a couple weeks because 2A left got too much rubber from all the tires hitting it and going 0 to 100 that fast.
But what about taxiways, Bert?
Possibly, don't know. I don't know the codes on that per the FAA. We'd have to ask.
And, you know, it's funny, I've been driving the section of 101 between San Bruno and Millbrae, watching the managed lane project roll out. And they've done some asphalting, but I think it was problems with the road. But ultimately, they are planning on rubberized asphalting north and south the entire way, which will give us a real opportunity to learn.
Yeah. Well, I've
Go
seen
ahead.
what it's done in Hillsborough, and I'm a fan of it. So I'd like to see more exploration of how that works. So yeah.
To me, I point people from 92 on 280 going south where they've rubberized asphalt and just how lovely it is.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, go ahead. I lost you. There you are.
Okay.
Go ahead, Justin.
Okay. All right. The last topic, I think, was inversion layers. And I agree that inversion layers have a pretty good effect on how noise propagates. It was probably been 3 years now, did a study for LAX for a community that's south of the airport that experiences what they deemed increases in noise levels in at night and in certain periods. And we, through actual monitoring and complaint data, they actually kept logs of when they experienced the increases, correlated those specific increases to inversion layer weather data received. It correlated 1 for 1, basically, that they experienced increases in annoyance during those times based off of how it propagated in the LAX region. And that report's available online through the LAX Roundtable website. But without a doubt, the issue here is that that can't be modeled currently. So it's something that LAX did through a monitoring effort, in addition to collaboration with the community, who took down detailed log information of every instance of hour or minutes of when they experienced an increase. And so that data was all then correlated to see, what was actually the cause. So just thought I would mention that. But yes, inversion layers is well documented in terms of its effects of propagating noise.
Justin, what I'm hearing is, and it's on our agenda, but I don't know if we're going to end up having time. If one of our goals of the Ground-Based Noise Committee was to come up with what would a ground-based noise report, flight quiet report, look like. But the data that just came from existing complaints and then comparing it to existing weather conditions was what gave LAX the information. We should roll that into what our own reports could be. It doesn't mean there's anything we could change, other than my note here is, if there are inversion layers, could different runways be used on departures, or different procedures be used? The angle of takeoff or something like that, which is well out of my knowledge base, but something that might mitigate those, as well as that word curfew on that. But if we can add that to what could go into a report.
I can say that the inversion layers here are quite thick and very large. In fact, across the bay, far north and south. So the immediate environs of the airport, it wouldn't be beneficial.
Looking forward to seeing the data on that. Again, if it's a change in a procedure, maybe it will provide, you know, the other part is that sometimes people here, my people, understand that when there's bad weather, the flights go in opposite flow, and they understand that that's for safety of all. And even though I'll get complaints, people calling me or emailing me, hey, that plane was right over my roof. They understand. So sometimes creating greater understanding of the public can, as long as they feel like they're being listened to and some effort is being made.
I recommend digging out Vince Mestry's study work done for the Oakland airport quite a while ago, about 15 years ago.
Can we add that one, Michelle?
What was the name of that, please, Bert?
It would have been Vince Mestre, M-E-S-T-R-E. He had a firm, Mestre, Greavy and Associates, but ended up with Landrum and Brown, but I think it was prior to his Landrum and Brown tenure.
Mhm.
And so I'm thinking it would have been 15 years ago, if not 20.
Mhm.
It's the Inversion Layers study at Oakland Airport.
Thank you.
All right, looking at time, we're at 12:54. We've given one recommendation, staff recommendations, and I'm going through all my papers. Michelle, do you need a vote from us or just to go ahead with these recommendations? What do you
I think
need?
it would be good for the members to do that. I actually heard more than one, so I'll not include anything that's not on there. But in other words, I heard Justin to modify the report to reflect noise data from the airplanes, checking on the humidity point, correcting the figure, you know.
Michelle, I'm
Mhm.
sorry, hold on before I have you do that. My apologies to the public. Let's open it up for public
Yeah,
comment.
thank you.
I'm so sorry, Michelle.
Thank you. So for everyone on the public, we will now take your comments. Please raise your hand and you will have 2 minutes. Let me share my timer. Give me 1 second. So I do see 2 hands raised. I will first call on Lynn Israelit, followed by Darlene Yapley. Lynn, please accept this request to unmute your microphone and begin speaking.
Hi, thank you so much for presenting this study. I just mainly wanted to really commend both Al Royce and Anne on your questions, which I think are really insightful. My concern is that while we have this amazing study, it's still not addressing, as you briefly mentioned, what the 250 members of our group are hearing in the hills of Burlingame, Hillsborough, and Millbrae. So while I'm not saying anything new, I just want to emphasize the need to take into account the hills and the creek corridors and the bouncing of sound, which sadly, I don't think this report addresses. And I would also agree that we need to look at other airports, maybe even Oakland, where I don't know if there's problems with noise in the Oakland or Fremont Hills, but we do need to still address that issue. And again, also the moving of the takeoff point when we had to put the breakaway cement in at the end of the runways. At that time, also the barrier, sound barrier or blast barrier was changed. And I don't think any of those major changes have been addressed in this current study. I think there's still very important aspects to look at if we're really going to understand what changed for the surrounding neighborhoods about 3 years ago.
Lynn, what runway was that again, please?
I can't recall which runways, but 2 of them got cement breakaway for safety strips put in so that the point in which the airplanes begin their acceleration for takeoff was moved.
One left, one right, but it's probably also on 28 too, or 19.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Israeli. I will now call on Ms. Darlene Yapley. Please accept this request to unmute your microphone and begin speaking.
Thank you very much for the study, the questions and the discussions. The good news is that the Ledge Committee included some language on policy for metrics and thresholds in the San Francisco Roundtable's March 15th letter that was submitted for the Federal Register. And that was breakout noise metric standards in terms of frequency, low and high frequencies, and replace the agency-wide CNEL DNL metric. Leveraging this content, please consider the following regarding policy for metrics and thresholds, because that's what we're talking about. And we want to include people that are experiencing ground-based noise as well as departure and arrival. So for the environmental review and the basis for sound insulation programs, the FAA needs a system of existing metrics and thresholds in addition to DNL. The Aviation Safety Noise and Abatement Act specified a system of metrics. So the FAA implemented only one metric DNL and only did A weighting. And so from a policy perspective, we need to push for a system of metrics because AEDT can do C weighting and above, but the FAA is not required to use them in their analysis or their decision-making. They only do 65 DNL. So the position I would say is that we need a system of metrics and thresholds that must consider ambient noise levels, daytime and nighttime, and more existing metrics. We don't need to research new metrics, which is C weighting and above. And this would address all of the different noise that people experience at San Francisco Airport. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yapley. Michelle, did you capture everything that both speakers said? They both had good points. Okay. I would only ask Ms. Yapley, always feel free to send me email on the specifics. I have a broken wrist right now, so I couldn't capture everything you said. Okay.
And is Kathleen Wentworth on the line? I'd love to hear her perspective. If she
Thank you, Al. Yes, Kathleen, any updates before we go into our recommendation point?
Hi, folks. I would like to discuss very briefly some thoughts that came to me as we were discussing the study in general. And that is the fact that I wonder if we should also be thinking about looking to the FAA for changes in the way that they calculate the noise impacts, especially in the wake of the release of the neighborhood environmental study. I think that they might be somewhat open to it. This is just off the cuff as we're talking. And I'm thinking if we had the data from the study combined with the low frequency noise that's been captured for some time, years on the noise frequency, on the noise monitors. Now I realize some of the data from the study did not overlap the noise monitors, but some of course did from what I could tell from the study. So we have some data that we could go take back. And I'm just thinking in terms of plotting that data on a map. And I'm not saying that we're making DNL contours, but I'm thinking we're making some kind of alternative map, a low frequency noise impact map that can give us an idea where the areas that are impacted are, and maybe to quantify it to the degree that we can from the study or from the noise monitor readings. And if we had this, and maybe it seems to me that a lot of times when you're doing something, you're taken more seriously if you have some fancy data and some fancy maps to show people. And this would be something that we could point to with the FAA if we were going to send them a letter and ask them to modify their regulations to include this or that type of phenomena, or maybe increase, not that I'm supporting DNL by any means, but the concept being, well, if C weighted is, Justin can tell me whatever percentage of DNL it is now, maybe we want to increase that percentage that constitutes DNL, so it has more weight. And so I think just as an idea to start, and maybe other people can jump on with other ideas, but somehow to codify and quantify as best as we can what all the data that we have access to from Justin's report and from Bert's data banks. Suggestion.
Thank you, Kathleen. I would take Kathleen's comments a step further. When Michelle and I talked about one of the outcomes, And I hear Bert saying that there's problems with trying to draw contours because the FAA doesn't use the way the other study did. But I'm looking at any one of the maps that were part of the study. In this case, I'm looking at page 85, which clearly shows by the modeling that Burlingame, Hillsborough, Millbrae, possibly a little portion of San Bruno are all at above 70 decibels on that. So to me, I am really curious. I'm not even curious. I want to see contours that reflect the real noise experience that we are here, we are feeling, we are living with day to day. And understanding Bert's concerns, I can understand how the airport would be very concerned. I think it's time that we ask for contours based on what Darlene has mentioned, but based on this. And I just would have loved, because you can almost draw the contour looking at each one of these maps in the noise study. You can draw it, which, you know, there's the problem, you can't really insulate low frequency noise, but at least we would have it. And at least then we can start looking for other mitigation for this kind of noise. So I like what Kathleen said. I would just say, I'd like to see contours now. I've been waiting 6 years to see contours that really reflect the noise that we experience here, and not the 3 houses in Millbrae that currently fall within the 65 decibel contour. It just is not a real reflection. It's not reality. So Michelle, if there aren't any other comments, then what do we have for your recommendations? And then if we could have a motion vote of the members, I think we might have lost Tom.
What I wrote down was that the committee would write a policy recommendation to FAA for their next round amendment of their model to include structures and sea weight. Now, I don't know if you have others, but the deadline, if you want to get it on the next membership committee as an action, would be July 28th to be included in the regular agenda packet. Justin to modify the report to reflect noise data mentioned in Bert's comments on the plane type, the humidity. He needed to do some research, some correction to a figure, and just clarifying language on the vegetative effectiveness and the terrain and the hillsides and the effectiveness of the report from that perspective. I heard also when SFO comes forward with their Fly Quieter program that the group would include GBN and or curfew recommendations, but I don't know that that's related to Fly Quieter, but at least GBN, that a future agenda is going to include information on building materials, including the Vince Mestry Oakland Forum Inversion Layer report, the aerogel manufacturers information, and looking at more information on the rubberized asphalt for new construction. And then Bert mentioned the FAA codes. There was something lingering out there around working with Caltrans on lands adjacent to the airport because they cut all those trees, but really nobody moved on that topic. So the only action requiring a motion is the writing the policy recommendation to FAA on their model to include structures and sea weighted, and to get it to me by the 28th, or if you don't want it on that particular agenda, I can give you deadlines for the next one. What I didn't include was any actions mentioned as next steps from both Kathleen and Darlene. I'd have to think a little bit about how does that relate to these other actions that were very clearly stated. It's almost as if it's a new report or a new, scope we'd have to do with Justin. So I didn't reiterate that as part of any action.
Michelle, Darlene mentioned the letter that was sent back in March, which, did you and Al write that? I know I just approved it. Or maybe it was you and Linda and Kathleen wrote that.
I'm going to let Al speak to that.
The staff took the lead in writing it based on the legislative committee's feedback. which included public feedback. And then the committee as a whole, as you recall, approved it. We sent it to the full SFO for their input. They approved it without any changes, and then we sent it off. And supplemental to that were letters sent by Palo Alto and by a couple other groups as well, other cities as well. But that report was sent under the heading of the Legislative Subcommittee, drafted initially by staff, including Justin too, by the way.
So do we have the same resources, Michelle, or is it really we elected officials drafting this version?
It's really up to you how you want to do it. If you understand what you want in there, then take it and run with it. If you want to brief me and tell me what kind of topics you want in there, I can do it and then send it back to the committee and you can take it back.
I like the
However you wanna
second
do it.
option. Sorry for interrupting. I like the second option.
I like
Al,
I agree.
Al, what did you, okay.
I agree. Could I add a couple more comments? So that's the one recommendation. I think there's uniform agreement on it. But Michelle, there's also, you alluded to a number of other recommendations, including Ann's comments about expanding to include contours, which are reflective of ground-based noise. I'd like to see a series of recommendations coming out of this study that are specific. I think there needs to be some action items that result from this. I also am cognizant of the comments that Lynn made with respect to what's not included in the study. I think we need to give some thought whether or not that study needs to be expanded or added, supplement it with a couple comments around what the impact has been on the moving of the kickoff points and the effectively the sound barriers removal. I am still puzzled, to be honest with you, why it seemed that in the mid 70s, and I'm taking my notes from our former assistant city manager, who was a construction engineer at the airport at the time, John Mullins, who said that there was massive changes in the airport structure at the time, that the runways and the whole configuration and the vegetation that was located there. And he believes there's a significant impact resulting from that change. And I'd like to know if, and I know things change, but is there any way to replicate some of those, if they were favorable, replicate some of those topography that existed at that time? It's a long way of saying, I think the study, one of the recommendations we ought to give some thought to supplementing the study with a couple of things it did not cover.
I'm just looking at timing here. I agree with you, Al. The timing would be, because I don't even know when we have our next ground-based noise meeting. It took 6 months before we had this one. Michelle, do you have an idea? Do we have a little bit of time to think about this and have another meeting and go where Al is suggesting? Or is it going to be 6 months before we meet again? And not to put you on the spot, Michelle, but just trying to plan how to do this.
I understand. I'm looking at the 2021 meeting schedule, and my thinking right now is that after the 8/4 regular meeting, that there will be 2 subcommittees, usually a technical working group meeting. And I think this next time that the legislative subcommittee was going to meet. Do you agree with that, Al?
Yes, we were going to meet next.
Right. So that would mean that the next ground-based noise meeting would be September 30th.
I will say, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I think one of the real concerns the membership has, and I'm not sure if it helps having subcommittees also support a resolution to increase dues or find new funding sources. Because the way we're staffed now, and we have great people, I love the people we have, but there's limits to time. It's really hard to make any progress. And so I just think we need to revamp how we do this, and whether that's a recommendation that comes from the subcommittees or just proposed at the membership in total. But, doing these meetings every 3 months or 4 months, we just can't get any traction.
I do think that is a good recommendation to be brought as part of discussions, particularly as we go forward with the ad hoc member expansion subcommittee. I think there are budget considerations. And so even without that, your point is valid. Yeah. Then you add that, then what? So I think that's an important point to be discussed.
Well,
Michelle, go ahead, Al.
No, I just don't want to lose the fact that We're charged with doing two things here. One is to figure out what's causing ground-based noise. And secondly, to come up with some recommendations to mitigate it. And our structure as such, it really makes it hard because there's so much time in between meetings. We have to address that as a procedure issue before we can make any real progress, I think.
Now, part of this could be handled simply with the ground-based noise reporting out at the next meeting, but a report out isn't an action. And Al, are you saying, do you want us to be more aggressive in
Yes.
saying that more funding needs to be found for staff so that we can have more frequent meetings?
Yes, exactly. We're charged with doing something, and I think our hands are tied in being able to do that. And so it's a misleading, I think our charge is misleading that people expect us to get stuff done. And it's hard for get stuff done if we only meet every 3 months.
And I think the timing is a bit off. And the reason why is at your last meeting was the budget meeting where you were talking about how much money we were going into the contract, which was with SFO for the next 3 years. We were entering into the contract with HMMH after they went through an RFP process. We were, renewing all the contracts. And so there was that discussion about the next 3 years and what did that look like, and that it resulted in 2. So in some ways, it's like we're going backwards, which is fine. I just wanted you to realize that we just adopted the budget. And so,
well, maybe the next budget needs to be, but it needs to be put on the table early on and get some action. And I think the legislative subcommittee, which Ann alluded to, 3 of us are on it. I think the ground-based subcommittee, I'm guessing the working group are all, and I know the membership committee are all going to be focused on, we need more resources to get done what we need to get done to make an impact. And,
Oh, I'm sorry, Al, given that there is this MOU subcommittee or ad hoc committee, at that point, that opens the door to discussion of independent city contributions. Michelle, would you have the bandwidth to say how much more it would cost us, the lump sum, and then divided by the members in whatever formula is used to give us the money to get the staff support we need to get these things done? And would you be able to share that at our August full roundtable meeting?
I'm not really clear
Well,
on
I'm
what
just
you're
saying,
asking
let's
me
say
to do.
we
Are you
needed 30.
asking me to, you'd have to tell me what you want, and then I'd have to then respond back to you with a budget, but I'm not sure, then how does that relate? Yeah.
Let me throw this out. So right now we have you and Angela on a part-time basis. If we wanted to move you to 3/4 or full-time, what would that cost?
Yeah, we can provide them. We should also think about whether you want to increase Justin's time as well.
And I would just like to note that for me personally, for my position, my time cannot be increased because I do work part-time for another agency.
Understood. And we appreciate all the time you give us.
It'd be job titles, not people, really.
However the county does its budgeting, but with this ad hoc committee, that to me is the doorway. So we wouldn't have to wait a year or 9 months to do the budget for fiscal year 22-23. We can be looking at it as an augment of 21-22.
yes.
Okay.
So can I make a recommendation, Ann?
Please.
I think what I would do for today is I do think there are 3 action items here, one of which is the resolution on the letter to the FAA with a similar or copy letter to congressional leaders. The second thing I would get a recommendation around is a recommendation on expanding the contours to include ground-based noise as one of the factors. I'd get that on the record. And the third thing, not a recommendation for the membership, but I would ask that we go back and look at this report again and make some specific recommendations with respect to what we want to supplement it with and what came out of this report that would be adaptable to resolutions, to action items. I don't know what they are right now, but I heard some things today that to me are actionable. And we had to get that on the paper and get it and start moving on some action items here.
I would second all 3 of those, but a friendly amendment.
Yep.
That some of what we talked about today were some additional things that could get put into the draft study without it costing any more money. And some of them are identifying additional study areas. Justin, are you capable of, I'm sorry, the way that came out. I know you can make the changes, you know, like even adding under section A, topography on there, but would you also be willing to add under recommended next steps, both what is covered under, you know, just now we've finally gone over the draft of the report, but additional study areas or additional costs on that? Or are we not quite there yet?
Well, I'm happy to do that. I just would need to be directed by Michelle to be able to do that. But yeah, we're able to adjust the draft report, absolutely. Or not draft report, but the final report. So if that's needed and requested, absolutely we could do that.
Okay.
But I would look towards Michelle to provide that guidance.
Okay, because I found the page, it's page 91, where you've got outreach communication with local planning departments.
Yep.
And then ongoing communications with SFO and future model. Some of it is there, maybe just make it clear of what's covered and then what would we need to find additional funding for. It doesn't, because a lot of what we've been doing with ground-based noise so far is really just looking at departure noise, not any of the other noises. But if, for example, rubberized asphalt cannot work on runways, can it work on taxi and gate operations? Will it help with that? We haven't really even dived into those kinds of ground operations. I know LAX is electrifying. I think San Francisco's working on it. We all understand the airports are financially impacted with COVID, so that'll slow everything down. But all electrification makes things quieter. And then there was one thing in your report, Justin, no, it was in the January 21st update of LBPR engines as a mitigation measure. I don't know if your report could talk, I don't know what an LBPR is. It's on page 2 of 8 of the January 21st approval scope of work on that. And that might be a future action. I missed it the first time I read it, but I found it today.
So we had a motion by Al.
I know, I'm just
and
asking if he
somehow
will.
we kind of got off that.
Sorry.
I'm not sure. We started with a friendly amendment, then we started.
Okay,
So
let me
happened
take
with
it back.
Al's?
Friendly amendment would be just to add what's currently funded and what would need additional funding. Does that work out?
I agree. I'm agreeable.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
In which case we have, who are the voting of GBN? Is it the 3 electeds as well as Bert?
I think you.
Or is it the 3 electeds? I'm sorry. I think this is our first vote.
Well, here we are. The members who verbalized it was Ann, Terry, Dave, Al, and Tom. Tom had to leave. Dave has an intern here, but you have other members, Cecilia, and that's all who's on right now besides you and Al. And so
Okay.
maybe.
Oh, Cecilia, Councilwoman Taylor. Oh, because she's not a voting member?
Well, she's participating. She just never signed up for this committee that was on the original list that I had, but I'm glad she's here and she should participate.
Very good.
Regular roundtable members would be allowed to vote.
Yeah.
Okay, so Bridget, welcome. Welcome as a new intern. You will be voting. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? With that, Kathleen, could you please call the vote?
Oh, Kathleen. You mean Angela?
Oh, Angela, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Angela, could you please call the vote?
Member Royce,
Aye.
Member Taylor,
Yes.
Chair Schneider,
Yes.
and those are the only members I have on the line. Yes.
But we think we have Bridget voting for or just representing Supervisor Pine.
Yes, she's
Okay.
just representing. Thank you.
All right, well, we've got 3 affirmative votes, so motion passes. Thank you, Al, for that. We have 8 minutes. And you know, aside from agenda item 2, those were other ground-based noise operations. Michelle, if it's okay, I'm going to table those and then move to the GBN glossary. Well, actually, let me take that back. Bert, could you please update us on the current EIR for airport expansion? And it's mainly up in the north. The comment period, I've gotten different letters and I'm not sure if the comment period is over. And it's agenda item 2E.
So are you talking about the CEQA notices that were sent out, I believe it was May?
Yeah, I received 2 different letters for both operations more closer to San Bruno, but a portion of a Millbrae neighborhood. And then up in the north where it kind of the northern end.
Okay, so the 2 notices I have that we are dealing with right now are the on-airport items. In fact, I'm sure what I have. All right. Okay. Too smart for my own good. Got trapped. All right. So let's try this.
Yeah, I know that I read the notice of project, or if that's the NOP, and that both Millbrae and Supervisor Pine's office sent letters for information to be included in the study area, the EIR. And then I got those letters and it said final. So I was confused.
All right, so I need to look at those, but the 2 that we're dealing with right now, the public notices on the Westfield Cargo redevelopment and the Consolidated Administration Campus, those would be the 2 that were based on the 1992 Master Plan EIR, which was a final. And I thought those were the 2 that were being referenced. So, all right, let me take note on this one and I'll come back to you with it.
Okay. And then something that we've had outstanding since our beginning while Bert is looking for that is agenda item number 3. Actually, sorry, guys, let me go back. Agenda item 2, the airport policy on use of auxiliary power units at gates and taxi operations. We talked about that a little bit during the discussion of the noise study, that maybe at least looking at rubberized asphalt might direct some of that. But I think the auxiliary power unit is based on contracts with individual airlines. And if we had a ground-based noise report reporting on how often the airlines exceed their 30-minute power time would be something to report, but that can roll into a reporting factor. I am concerned we don't get to talk about emissions, but given that the new international gates are right next to several San Bruno and Millbrae neighborhoods, that microparticulates are basically being blasted straight into those neighborhoods for 30 minutes at a time per airplane, plus taxiing, that we start looking at what that impact is. Airport ground equipment transition. I know, just so everybody knows, there's been a lot of work on heavy equipment and converting to electric. It's not that easy because this is equipment expected to do a lot of heavy lifting, but there's work happening with that. All of the electrification will make things quieter, although maybe it'll make the beep, beep, beep sounds more annoying. And then discussion of environmental mitigation. That one I don't have anything that we can handle quickly. Michelle, if we can table that for a future meeting. Any historic mitigation on low frequency or ground operations, We've already talked about 2D, review of noise contours, and that was in the motion that we made. And then Bert, did I give you enough time to catch up with that? So when you say a 1992 master plan final, does that mean issues that say Milbrae or Supervisor Pine brought up will or will not be considered in the EIR?
So these two CEQA notices that I was brought up, these two here, the Westfield Cargo and the Southfield Consolidated Administrative Campus, those two are basically alterations to the 1992 Master Plan EIR. And so we did the CEQA documents for it, and they were filed as such. Now, neither of these are expansion and do not lead to the airport road. So both those are available through the body, through the mailings and the emails that were sent out by the airport.
Okay, so the construction of the Hyatt Hotel with the lovely curve, which increased the noise Milbrae experiences because we think it's acting as an amphitheater, that was also covered under a very old document, a 1992 document, where we were given no ability to comment on the design of a building. And I think this goes back to Mayor Royce's comment is we need to know what buildings are doing. I can sit on my kitchen porch and see the hotel, and I can feel the noise coming off that building. I feel the vibrations coming off that building. So, but I guess this is a done deal. The city of Milbrae, I believe, thought that there would be a full EIR and we would be commenting on the EIR, and we never heard back from the airport from our letter that was written well over a year ago, before COVID, I think, on that. So I'll report back to my city.
We're giving you a heads up about the time. It's just about 1:30.
I'm just going to go to the GBN glossary. We had talked about the terminology when we sit at a round table, a lot of new members, and a lot of the discussion has revolved around in-flight noise, in-flight terminology, and there's a whole other vocabulary for ground-based noise and low frequency noise. And we've talked about trying to create a glossary for this. Is this something within existing funding for HMMH to do?
I think that Bert had an idea on this using the existing glossary. What was your idea, Bert?
My idea was to, whatever terms we decide we either wish to glean from the existing glossary or add to the existing glossary. All of it should be based on that. If we wish to create a subset that is, in the end, pulled from that for ground-based noise, we can do that. But all of it should still go into the master glossary.
Let me go back. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, so I included that in the packet. Did we feel like that did not include any ground-based noise, or did we need to look at the GBN study that was just completed to see what we need to bring over? And that's Anne's question, because you put this on the agenda. Are you saying that the existing glossary doesn't have them?
And I apologize, Bert, that I missed the noise class that you gave, because I know you said that you've incorporated some GBN in it. It is a different set of issues than what happens with the bulk of our conversation on Next Gen. And had I been at that class, I might have seen if there was enough GBN explained in it to have all the members of the roundtable understand what our residents here experience. And maybe it's the glossary is one thing, but it's the training in it. So it's kind of like looking at reading Appendix A in the study, which is airport noise technology terminology, and it still heavily goes towards A-weighted, high frequency noise as opposed to what we are experiencing. And I just would like to see it divided off. So let me think about that and we'll bring it back to our next agenda on that.
Well, like I said, we can create all the terms you want for a GBN glossary. Those still should go into the master glossary.
Yeah, I understand, Bert. I think you've taken the time with me to explain how low frequency noise travels versus high frequency. I think Al is leaving us. Thank you, Al. And, you know, line of sight, all of that kind of stuff. It's still a lot to absorb when you are not an engineer, and especially not a noise engineer. And I think it hurts our ability to communicate with the powers that be, that all they think of is high frequency in-flight noise. So let me do a little more thinking about that. But yeah, I hear you. Maybe we add to the terms and the definitions in the glossary and put GBN on each one. I mean, that would be a start to help people understand. And I will try to go listen. You recorded your training, didn't you, Bert?
Yes.
And I appreciate that you added low frequency noise, because in the first 2 classes that I took, I think I asked the questions, but I don't think, golly, one was 6 years ago, Bert, so it's hard to remember what exactly was in a class 6 years ago. So
Yeah,
just
we
want to
used
make
have
sure
an
that
entire 20-minute section on it years ago. And it was the HMMH LFSL study on their new metric they were working on at the time. And
I know my takeaway was you can't mitigate it. So, oh well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the most depressing thing on that. So I know we are past time, and I thank you all for being here. Justin, thank you for the report. Again, on rereading it, it brought up a whole bunch of additional questions. I will try to get those to you. And Bert, thank you for your time. And Kathleen, definitely help us with that letter. Kathleen, with that, I will adjourn the meeting at 1:34. And thank you all.
Bye, Ann.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Keep
you.
wearing your
Thank you.
masks, folks. I
Yeah.
came down with a cold. So my first cold in a year and a half. Wear your masks.
Take care.